Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen is the current chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. She's the chief Republican voice on foreign affairs in all of the Congress. And in this role, she has had the opportunity to voice her strong support for the State of Israel and a strong supporter of human rights, including her opposition to Castro's dictatorial regime in Cuba. As the wife of a Vietnam veteran, Chairwoman Ros-Lehtinen is a passionate proponent of improving our nation's military, safeguarding our veterans' health care, and ensuring that returning veterans have access to a college education. It's great to have you here again with us.
Well, thank you, Lester. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Great to be back on your show.
Well, you are really the voice of the Republican Party so far as foreign affairs are concerned.
Well, we're very worried about America's role in the world. Are we using our resources in the correct way? There's a lot of talk about this Arab Spring. Has it produced the positive results that we have wanted? And what we want is for all people to be free, for human rights to be respected, for true democracy to take root. And unfortunately, when a democracy happens, when election happens, sometimes folks get into power and then they forget about democracy. So we want to make sure that these new governments that have popped into place throughout the Middle East will respect Israel's right to exist, will sign peace treaties with Israel. And we're also worried about Iran, the nuclear power, its threat to world stability, and also the Iranian threat that continues to dominate the Western Hemisphere. We don't talk about it very much up here, but I certainly do. Iran and its proxies have been all over the globe, most especially and most pronounced in the Western Hemisphere, where they're seeing that there's a great opportunity because of Hugo Chavez, Daniel Ortega, Evo Morales, Rafael Correa, the Castro brothers, all these places that where they see fertile ground for them to take root.
Well, something strange is the fact that recently I saw that you intervened when they were trying to erect some sort of a monument to Che Guevara.
Yes, this is an amazing little chapter in history. We consider, those of us who have studied Cuban history, Che Guevara to be a cold-blooded assassin, somebody who took great pleasure in actually executing people. He would get his pistol and put it in the temple of somebody and just blow their brains out. He was a sadistic, ruthless, horrible person who was murdered by the Bolivians in a place where he was trying to start up another rebellion. And because he's got Irish roots from his mother's side, there's a place, Galway, Ireland, that wants to erect a monument for Che Guevara to celebrate his Irish roots. And of course, any country and any city and anybody can do whatever they wish, but I communicated with the officials there to let them know that I represent a lot of the victims of Che Guevara's heinous crimes, and that they should think about maybe erecting another monument right next to it with the names of all of the people that Che Guevara was responsible for killing. And so they say, well, you're interfering in our internal affairs. And I said, I'm not telling you that you must stop it. I have no power over you. I just have the right, as any individual would, of protesting a monument for an assassin. So I don't know if Galway, the city, is going to go ahead with it. I hope not, because I think it's in the names of the victims. I think it's a cruel thing to erect a monument for somebody who brought such a tragedy to my native homeland of Cuba. But everyone is free to do what they wish. It certainly would be a tourist attraction, because people think of Che Guevara as a sexy figure. You see his face on T-shirts on college campuses, and you ask the young people, as I have, do you know who that is? And they just think he's some romantic Robin Hood figure who stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Well, actually, what he did is he killed a lot of people, rich and poor. He had no mercy for human life.
Well, you know, you point up something very important. With all the concentration that we have and scrutiny on the Middle East and in China, very little is now focused upon Cuba. Where do we stand with Cuba today, and what do you think should be done?
Well, sadly, so many years after Castro ruthlessly took over power, we still have an island nation that's full of 11 million oppressed Cubans. What happens there is that they don't have any elections. They only have one political party, the Communist Party, and it's unbelievable. No press. No free press. We could not be having a show like this, Lester, in Cuba, because you would not be allowed to operate. I would not be allowed to come on your show. You can't just do interviews like this in Cuba. And some people say to me, well, you know, Ileana, we've had this embargo on Cuba for 50-something years. It hasn't worked. Why don't we try something new? And I understand that there's a great deal of a lot of people who agree with that. But what I say to them, Lester, is, well, we've had 50-something years of every other country in the world engaging commercially and diplomatically with Cuba, and that has not helped the Cuban people get any closer to freedom, to democracy, to respect for human rights. So the embargo was never meant to be the turning point to make suddenly a terrible regime suddenly become democratic, but it's a way that we can put public policy in place and say, we think that this system is reprehensible, we will not engage with you. And so we hope that even proponents who are against the embargo, that we want the same goal, which is that people should be free, that they should be free to elect their own leaders, that their human rights should be respected, that dissidents' rights should be respected, and that opposition can flourish.
But do you think the same thing is possible in Cuba that has happened in the Middle East?
I do not think that it's possible. And let me tell you why, Lester. I think the Middle East is not the proper model to use for Cuba. I think North Korea is the proper model to use when talking about Cuba. North Korea, you have this hermit kingdom where you have a complete control over individual lives, where you have no free media whatsoever, no access to the internet, to Twitter. You've seen all of the protests that have occurred in Libya, in Egypt, and everywhere, in Syria, and people are communicating through their iPhones. Incredibly enough, through Twitter, through Facebook. That's how a lot of these demonstrations have started. There is none of that in Cuba. It is just as closed and just as repressed as in North Korea. So every country that has been engaging in Cuba, they have not brought anything to help the Cuban people free themselves of this dictatorship. And another point on what's going on in Cuba is we have an innocent American contractor, Alan Gross, who is spending yet another year in prison in Cuba. And what was his crime? Trying to bring satellite radios and computers to the tiny Jewish community in Cuba so that they could communicate with the outside world. The Castro brothers consider that a crime against the state.
Wasn't it just the idea of religious articles, though, I thought, primarily, that he was carrying?
Well, he was carrying all kinds of communications equipment because that's allowed under the Helms-Burton law that we passed in order to help the opposition get the tools, because right now nobody's got an internet. The only people who have it are if you stay in a hotel, if you're a tourist. So if you're a tourist, you really don't get a sense of what Cuba is all about because you're staying in a hotel, you have internet, you have room service, it looks like you're in just in another city in rather rustic city, but in the United States or elsewhere. Well, I don't know if the United States is a good comparison. Nothing in Cuba seems to work. But you don't get a sense as a tourist of what really is going on in Cuba. And it's just total repression. And Ladies in White, this peaceful movement of women who are calling for better treatment of their relatives in prison, who are in prison because of political crimes, meaning they're speaking out for democracy. They are dragged through the streets of Havana. They are beaten savagely. And where's the attention given to these peaceful group of protesters? You pick up the New York Times or the Washington Post, and rarely do you read an article about what's really going on with the dissident movement in Cuba. It's there, it's real, and it's growing.
Well, we've got to cut away from you for just a moment while our local stations cut in, but we'll be back to you right after that.
Thank you, Lester.